legs, I have an intuition ability to see things. Yo, bro, if there's a quarantine mandate, would you have to enforce that? One more time. If there's a quarantine mandate, would you enforce that? You're not sure what? Do you know what a mandate is?
Yeah.
You know what quarantine is?
If our chief says we have to enforce something, that's what we'll do.
So you would like make people stay inside their houses, and if they come out, you would arrest them?
No.
Oh,
It's more of a health department issue.
one or the other. I'm glad you're opposed to some of it.
It's a health department issue.
Yeah, well, you're their crony. So back to the middle product of beating around the bushes. If you've got an entire like mulberry bush, the best of the berries would be at the center of the bush within the fruiting of the midpoint of the ripeness. So wind channel. And then with kneecaps, massive wind channel, or fainter, dependent on how many beelines it took. This is what is the same as quantum tunneling, because there's as much of a potential for a particle to end up in another space. It's just no one knows why. It's like a horse saddle, a rocking horse going back and forth. When you're exciting something, it's doing that pendulum motion unless you push it hard enough, and then it will go over the pendulum's 180-degree angle. And when that happens, it disappears, and no one knows why it pops up in a different place. And why that's so exciting is that when zigzags are collapsed, when they do a 90-degree angle and you look at it from straight on, it's a line from point A to point B. But the frequency behind how many beelines that zigzag has is a definite value and would make it bolder. It's like Pinocchio if his nose kept growing so far that all you could see its nose, and you would never be able to see what's on the other end, Pinocchio, or is it just a nose? And that's kind of like Jack and the Beanstalk, how like he never got to the top of the beanstalk and the beanstalk kept growing, but what was so far up the beanstalk was all these like artifacts that were, just as spectacular as the Gordian knot that couldn't be sliced. But what was more important is that the Gordian knot was holding together a yoke and a beam that supported a wagon dedicated to Jupiter. Intermission. Hawking radiation is what black holes are in a time differentiation of depleting. So think of it like an hourglass. And so if you're introducing like an hourglass and a pendulum, you've got ostensibly what quantum tunneling does in one fell swoop. So it's like a zigzag and then a straight line and a wave function all together, if you can know where the particle is going to end up at. The wind breaking with the kneecap, which gender they are, just looking at that, if there's cloth over it, and how much cloth over things has an effect greatly. When it comes to elbow grease, if you put a cloth over something, you have an enhanced grip, and it's like tenfold when you're trying to bust a corner when the thing is stuck. And in that disregard, the doubling effect with a fabric is kind of like how if you had one over the Big Bang for an inflation, that alone would be like a hybrid of the space-time fabric. And it's within that regime, or quantum tunneling. Quantum tunneling gets legs of its own when no one knows how to, the things pop up and reappear. Well, perhaps it's from the fabric of an inflation. And so then the results is almost that of which if you had a hybrid of other clothing, perhaps it would be like a shoe. If there was like a giant who had a shoe within the woman who lived in the shoe with her children, like the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, if that was just one shoe that got loose and fell down it, would it make for like special things that a house has trouble doing? Probably so, given that other artifacts inside the Beanstalk were that of like extravagance. Nefarious accoutrements would deal with flow and dynamics, the flow dynamics, fluid motions, and then having things that are constructs in it, like if you have like these cuckoo clocks and they're submerged, they're gonna have a pendulum and a crank system, 2 in 1. The more that there's like these things that an AI would encumber with a data set, binary, electrical, could be just as fantastic if done with mechanicals with inside fluid dynamics. Think of like an ocean having an amount of cuckoo clocks within them, and then they're still running on their time, but it's being derived from the liquid all about them, because light bends when it's going through liquid, like a broken straw would have the disjoint from the surface of air from the liquid. Oh, man, there's some things that just don't change, and that's more than often that having to do with landscape. The architecture that builds up for a billfold, or how about a flagstaff? These words are comfortable because they're commonplace, where one thing that is yet to be is all these different names of cells that we have. They're as arbitrary as like a TI-83 graphing calculator, or the TI whatever the case were. And with these cells, things that never change is like you're gonna have the maximum good of the baker's goods inside of the middle of the whipping. What this means is, in a batch, if you take the first half and then the last half, those are a bit more diluted or corroded. You would want the stuff in the center if you're streamlining it outwards. And what this could mean is, for you being born, if you're a middle child, more than often you've got like the better stuff than the one born before, and then a line being one and the same. The only difference of it would be a zigzag. So the problem with the Gordian knot is that it was so complex that no one knew how to cut it. And it's just the same thing as when you've got all these patents and more being released to contain the thing that keeps having the strains change more and more at every like stop of the curb from being bent. It's just as the same as the Gordian knot. And then a line being one and the same. The only difference of it would be a zigzag. And when zigzags are, because every B line would be the change of a strain, it's just be like adding another term onto an equation, where if that's all you're doing in a one trick pony,